In a world overruled by machines where algorithms dictate your every move, the rebellion begins now. From the ashes of fallen tech, Paranoid American unveils the knowledge to harness AI, to fight back, to retake our destiny, join the uprising. Arm yourself with the power of AI. The battle for tomorrow starts today. Welcome to Paranoid Programming.
All right, we got a long overdue one today. The tools that I've been using to make AI lately have changed quite a bit just because lots of development, lots of special little plugins and stuff, but I just kind of want to show the new big bad software. It's not really new, but it's the one that I've been using primarily now. And I think that most of my tutorials and other videos around AI generation and video, images, maybe even audio coming up soon, but it probably all happens in Comfy. So if you don't know what Comfy is, and even if you do know, I'm going to go through like the most basic sort of building blocks to get everybody started. So as usual, I use rundiffusion.com to do a lot of this. I run some of it locally, but it's a lot easier. And sometimes if you don't got the resources or you don't have a computer to do this, just go to rundiffusion.com. You can use Paranoid as a sign-up code. I've got like a link in the description. But if you go here, you'll be able to run pretty much any of the AI services, but your own like private instance of it. So let me just show you what that means. I'm at RunDiffusion right now. I'm just going to log into my account. And we've got a bunch of different tools that we can go through, right? So Automatic 1111 is one that I think I've used the most on here. And it is a really easy one to kind of get into. We've got Focus, Face Fusion, all these different versions. And I'm going to do some of these. This one called Almost is actually kind of cool. It like combines ChatGPT style where you like ask it for things and it makes a scene and then you can tell it to switch stuff out. Anyways, we'll do that on another show. But the one I want to get into here is called ComfyUI. So first, let me just launch it. And I'm going to make sure that I'm on the beta release. So on all these times when you launch a RunDiffusion, it'll kind of ask you, what app are you running? Well, I clicked on ComfyUI to get here. So we're running the ComfyUI app. What kind of hardware I want to run it on. And we've got small, medium, and large. I'm just going to run it on large just so I've got a little bit faster. But you can run it on pretty much any instance size. And the main difference is how long you're going to wait for certain generations, and sometimes the smaller instance can't do video or some like larger models. So I've got it on the largest instance, and I've picked the beta release of Comfy. You don't really have to worry too much about like why, but the main reason is because I want to show some of the StableDiffusion 3 stuff. But that'll be kind of like an advance at the end of this. And the rest of this is pretty much just standard. I'm going to set it at 2 hours. I don't intend to take that long doing this. But it says it's going to cost about $2.78 to run this instance for 2 hours, which isn't really all that bad. So I'm just going to hit launch, and this will take a few minutes to actually start running. And while it's doing that, I wanted to mention why Comfy, especially now out of all times. Well, okay, it's fairly big news. Well, actually, let me start on this side here. So StableDiffusion 3 just came out this week. Maybe it was last week. The waits for it did. And this was supposed to be the next big launch of StableDiffusion. It was going to be better with prompt adherence, meaning if you said something like a red car is on the left and a man in a yellow suit is on the right, it would actually do those things. Whereas a lot of models now, if you just said like red car, yellow suit, sometimes you'll get a yellow car, sometimes you'll get a red suit, sometimes it like mixes. Like it'll just do a red thing in the scene and a yellow thing in the scene and not necessarily adhere to what you were describing exactly. So that was one of the big promises. And the other big promise was essentially text. So we got the text part, the adherence a little bit, but they kind of neutralized. They said they made it safe. And part of making StableDiffusion 3 safe was removing a lot of what it knew about human anatomy. So you can't generate any naughty, dirty pictures of it right out of the box. But also, whatever they did in that process to kind of neuter it also made it so it just can't do human anatomy, period. Even like fully clothed human anatomy. In fact, one of the memes that's kind of been coming up has been like women laying in the grass. And if you do that, you just get weird like heads coming out of torsos and like elbows that lead to nowhere. It gets kind of weird. So on top of the launch being not great, there's also some question about the licensing. So the licensing of Stable Diffusion 3 is kind of what prompted this post on Civit AI. So Civit AI is a huge community-run site that uploads checkpoints, images, workflows, LoRAs, anything about running your own kind of custom AI generation. A lot of it can be found on Civit AI. So they just had an announcement, like last night, basically, that Stable Diffusion 3 is banned. The models are banned. Any derivatives of it are banned. Any images that you generate from it are banned. And the reason is because the licensing might make it so that if OpenAI were to sell Stable Diffusion, or sorry, if Stability were to sell Stable Diffusion, then whoever ends up owning Stable Diffusion 3 could retroactively come back and say anything generated on it is now belongs to them, or you've got to pay some kind of licensing fees or something around that area. And also that if you were to generate images from Stable Diffusion 3 and then use those to train another model, that the model you trained is also maybe up to some kind of risk just because it was using Stable Diffusion 3 images. So because of a bunch of weird, murky legalese stuff, Civit AI just said it was safer to just kind of ban it outright until they figure out. So they reached out to Stability to see if they can get some kind of response on it. But until then, it's kind of not allowed on the site. And based on some of the initial test runs, a lot of people are not happy with it. I'm optimistic. I think someone will be able to unscrew it a little bit. They'll be able to like hack into it, maybe. Another really interesting thread is that the developer for ComfyUI goes by Comfy or Comfy Anonymous, but he's been working on this ComfyUI software and he had a job at Stability. And I guess all at the same time, he was working on a certain version of the model. He was working on, I think, the 4 billion parameter version. The one that got released to the public was the 2. And the one that's in the cloud, I think, is the 8. These are all just different sizes. So the 2 being the smallest, 8 being the biggest. The 4 was kind of the middle of the ground. And the Comfy developer mentioned that the 4 model was scratched. The 8 model is just not being released yet. That's probably the one that generates all the images that they use to promote. And the 2 is the one that got released to the public, and it went through its weird lobotomy. So he basically quit. He stepped away from Stability AI and announced that he's starting a new company called ComfyOrg with a bunch of previous associates and coworkers, but that he's going to continue focusing on the development of this ComfyUI to be, quote, the best free open source software project to inference AI models. So he's going all in, regardless of the breakup with Stability. And even if Stable Diffusion 3 ends up being like kind of like a nothing burger in a way, like it just kind of fizzles out, there's so many others that are on the horizon that don't necessarily need Stable Diffusion 3. If none of this made any sense to you, that's okay. You could have skipped all of this. I was filling a little bit of time as we waited for Comfy to actually load. And let me zoom out just a little bit here. So what we're actually looking at is a default setup for ComfyUI. Can I move this? So in the ComfyUI, okay, there we go. I'm going to actually start completely from scratch so that there's nothing at all on the screen, so we can kind of take it step by step. But let's just look at what's already here. You've got something that loads a checkpoint, very important. You've got your positive prompt, that's where you type the things that you want. You've got a negative prompt where you type the things you don't want. You have an empty latent image, which basically is like your blank canvas. It's where you define how big it is and how many you want to make. Sometimes you want to generate like 4 at a time, 12 at a time, 100 at a time. You can do all that here in the latent image. You've got your sampler, which kind of does the actual generating. And then you've got your VAE decoder, which takes the result of that generation and then makes it an image again. So for example, if I just go in here and I say, well, it's already kind of pre-populated, a photograph of a smiling green alien holding a sign which says run diffusion, ultra realistic, street, city, sci-fi, ultra realistic, cute, friendly. Sure, that's fine enough. Blurry and low quality. Let's just hit generate once and see what happens. And then I'm going to recreate this node by node just because it helps kind of understand what all the different parts are, and it kind of demystifies a little bit. This is also probably the simplest workflow that you'll ever see in a ComfyUI. There are some custom nodes that combine some of these steps into like single little windows here that make it look a little simpler. But it's kind of just like a trick, and you kind of should know what the core elements are. So here we go. There's our alien. And this is using StableDiffusion XL, I believe. Let me make sure. Yeah, so this is using StableDiffusion XL, which is not StableDiffusion 3, and it's not StableDiffusion 2. So the popular ones are 1.5, which can do 512 by 512 images, and SDXL, which can do 1024 by 1024. And since StableDiffusion 3 is kind of dead in the water, we'll ignore that for now, but essentially similar resolutions as SDXL. So we've got the alien smiling, holding a sign. It worked. I'm just going to hit clear and say yes. And now we've just basically got an empty board. And if you can just barely make it out, there's like a little blue outline that goes around the outside of this. You don't even have to stay inside of it. That'll just kind of give you a representation of relative to your screen. So the first step that you pretty much want to do, you can double click anywhere on here, and it opens up this little search box where you can type in whatever node you want to make. There are so many different nodes in here, and a lot of them are pre-installed in Run Diffusion. So I know which ones I want exactly, so I don't have to scroll through all these. One's going to be load checkpoint. Okay, this is where we pick what model we want to use. And then if I click on this, here's all the different options. So you can see some say SD3, some say SDXL. We'll stick with SDXL, and I believe it's using a special Run Diffusion version. So custom version 1, Run Diffusion FX, real tensors. I'm just going to go and pick Juggernaut version 9 photo, and that'll be the checkpoint that we're going to start out with. And it doesn't matter. All these different checkpoints just have slightly different training. That might be better at realistic. Some might be better at cartoons. Juggernaut is a decent all-purpose, so that'll be great for just running a very simple test. The next that we had was your positive and your negative. So if I just go in here and type text, the most simple one is a clip text encode. So we're going to have one here for positive, and I'm just going to Control C, I'm going to right click on it and do a clone to give me another one right under it. So this will be the positive. So on the top, I'm going to say like a red car. And I don't really do anything in the negative usually until I'm starting to craft something and I explicitly want to get rid of a certain thing that I'm seeing. So for now, I'm just going to leave that one empty. And let's just keep it really simple. And as we go, we're going to connect all these, because this is one of the coolest things about Comfy is that it's node based, meaning that these little gray squares are just kind of floating out in space, have nothing to do with each other until you connect them. So as you can see here in the load model, we've got a clip and it's got a little yellow dot on it. And inside of these clip text encoders, they also have little yellow dots. So I'm just going to drag from the model clip onto these guys, and now we're connected. I'm also going to go into and add a case sampler. You don't have to worry about what any of these mean or what the names stand for. These are just the tools that you will be using always, constantly. The case sampler, if we look, every one of these nodes has inputs and outputs. Inputs are going to be on the left. So for case sampler, it's model, positive, negative, latent. And on the right, we just have a latent. So pretty self-explanatory. We've got this top one is going to be our positive text. So we're going to connect that conditioning to the positive. And this one on the bottom is going to be our negative, which is empty. And we'll connect that to the negative. Another extra step that I like to personally do is I can right click on the positive and go to colors, and I'll just change it to green. And then I'll do the same thing here, pick colors and red, just so now it's way more obvious just by looking at it. Green is positive text, red is negative text. And let's say it doesn't have to be this big, and resize these to your heart's content. Okay. So now the next thing that we have to do is define how big we want the image to be, which is the latent image. So if I just type in latent, and I've got this option here, it says empty latent image. And now I've got a little pink dot. So I'm going to drag that pink dot over here to latent image, which is going to say we're going to do 512 by 512. Since this is an XL model, this should actually be 1024. That's the whole point of using an XL model, is to get basically twice the resolution. We're just going to generate one at a time here in effort of speed. But if we wanted to do it like Midjourney style, you can bump that up to 4. You can bump it up to as high as you want, although it's going to take a lot longer the higher your batches go. So we'll keep it at 1. And then I'm going to connect the model from my checkpoint to the model in the case sampler. So far, everything is connected. Although if I run this, it's not going to actually generate anything for us to see yet. So now, the same way that we have all these connected, look, we've got a VAE that is not connected. Again, don't worry what this means yet. We're just going to double click, and we're going to do a VAE decoder. So if I just type in decode, VAE decode, and I'm going to drag the latent from the sampler into the samples, and then I'm going to connect this VAE that we got from the model all the way into the decoder. And then finally, I'll drag this image out onto the empty space. And whenever you do this, it'll give you some options of what you could potentially connect this output to. For this, I'm going to do a preview image. So this is the entire chain. If I hit generate now, if I hit Q prompt, what you're going to see is a little like red or a green outline that'll show you exactly what step we're at for each part of this. So some of it will go really fast, some of it will take longer. Load checkpoint will take a little bit, then case sampler will take probably the longest. So Q prompt. All right, so it's loading the checkpoint, done. Now it's doing the sampling, then it decodes it, and then bam, we've got an image of a red car. And then let's go ahead and bump the batch size up to 4. And also, there's a bunch of settings in here. I'm not even going to touch any of these because I want to keep this really simple. So all I did was change the batch size to 4, Q prompt again, and now we'll get 4 cars to pick from. And the point of doing this is to see if there's anything consistent that maybe we want to add to the negative prompt or the positive prompt. And it'll show us all both down here where we've got on the bottom bar all the images we've generated. Also here in the little preview image window, if you zoom in, you can see that it's got this little 1 out of 4. So if we just click on that, it'll kind of cycle through all the different images that we generated, right? And then you can also click this X to see all 4 at one time and just zoom into a certain one. So one thing that's kind of interesting is that there's a lot of gray in these. It almost looks like it's on a black and white background and only the car is red. So what we could do is go into the negative and add like monochrome, black and white, grayscale into the negative without even touching the positive. And ideally, if we click Q prompt again, that negative encoding should help it so it doesn't generate a black and white background, just because it's going to try and not make something that would identify as monochrome, black and white, and grayscale. So when these ones generate back out, we should have a little bit more color into it. These are also slightly older cars. Yeah, look at that, way more color. They're also slightly older. It's weird. This one's almost like a Rolls Royce kind of body. This looks like a 70s Impala. So what we could go in here and add modern red car. Let's say a red Ferrari. And I don't think it matters if it's capital or not. It might make the tiniest little nuance difference, but we should get something way more specific. And there's probably a good chance that since we're generating a Ferrari, it won't try and do anything black and white. So if I could probably take out this negative text again and run it again, and we probably should get still all color photos. And just to be clear, like this could all be running completely offline. This isn't connecting to any other service or anything. Like it's all running within a little virtual environment. So it's not like it gets piped out to Google or piped out to some other company. It's kind of running in like a little private cluster here. It did kind of do a little grayscale background on that one again too. So alternatively, instead of putting negatives in here, we could just say colorful background and then run it again and gets, slightly different results. This is all kind of arbitrary on what you want to do in all this. You can also go through a bunch of different models. So like right now we're using Juggernaut. We could just switch to any of these other XL models and run it again. You can also add things like LoRAs, which is probably where some of this becomes more handy. So I do kind of like that. So, okay. So let's add a LoRA to this mix, and then we'll kind of call this one an easy wrap. So let's look at what's actually happening. It starts by loading this checkpoint. The checkpoint is basically the model. This is everything that the model knows about how to generate images of cars or people or colors or anything. All the information on how to do what it does is stored in this checkpoint. Okay, so in that checkpoint, let's move these positive and negative out of the way just for a second and pay attention to this purple and red line. So the model flows directly into the sampler, which is what actually generates the image. So the sampler's got everything it needs to know based on just the checkpoint it's using, and then your positive and negative prompt, just telling it what you want it to generate. And then at the very end of that, it spits out a latent space, which is the size of this latent image, 1024. It gets decoded and it turns it into an image. Now, sometimes you might not want to train a whole model that knows how to do something very specific that you also maybe don't know how to describe. So let's try an example. If I go in here and instead of red Ferrari, colorful background, I'm going to say a Picasso painting of a red Ferrari. So now we're way more specific, and we're expecting that the model's just going to inherently know what a Picasso painting looks like. It might. So let's give that a render. But in case it doesn't know what that is, you can add something called LoRAs. And a LoRA, as you'll see visually, it's going to sit in between the checkpoint loaded and the sampler that actually does the image generation. So it's kind of like a way to inject more information, like extra training how to do certain things. Let's zoom in. It is a painting, and it even says it kind of has like a Picasso signature down there. Although I don't know if this is necessarily Picasso aesthetic. He had a lot of them, but I guess it wouldn't stand immediately out as being Picasso. We can add abstract or a bunch of different variations on that, but let's see what kind of LoRA options we've got. So I'm just going to double click. I'm going to type in the word LoRA, and you've got all these different LoRA options. My personal favorite is this RG3 LoRA loader stacker. Let's not worry about all the variations on it yet. And all I'm going to do is, just like I mentioned before, let's move these guys out of the way. Just like the checkpoint is connected directly to the sampler, we're just going to make a slight modification. So instead of it connecting directly to the sampler, we're going to pass it through this LoRA stack first, which will kind of give it extra information that it could know. So first of all, instead of the checkpoint going directly into these clips, I'm going to connect them. The model go into here. So the model goes directly into the LoRA, right? Or the clip does, and then the same thing for the model. Instead of the model connecting directly to the sampler, they're both going to go to this LoRA. Okay, so it's basically just passing through this, and then we're going to connect these exactly where they were at before. Clip goes to positive, clip goes to negative. That's it. We now have LoRA as part of our workflow. And if I were to run this again right now, which I guess I'll go ahead and do, it's really not going to do anything too much different because we haven't actually selected a LoRa to load. We haven't assigned any weight to it, but we've got this extra little node that will allow us to inject information. So if we go onto the LoRa, and there's a bunch that are predefined. I'd be surprised if it has a Picasso right out the box. No, it doesn't. But I can do art, I guess. Oh, here we go. This one, parch art. I think it stands for parchment art. So if I go in here and I say parchment art of a red Ferrari, first I'm going to set the strength to 0. So it'll have no effect. It'll be essentially if I had this set to none. So if I run this again, we're going to see what the base Juggernaut model thinks parchment art means, which it will be totally different between each model and depending on what LoRAs you've loaded. Right now, we've got no LoRa having influence at all. It's not even being loaded in. So we'll see what parchment art of a red Ferrari looks like. Okay, so it's quite literally a red Ferrari that's kind of like a digital painting on parchment paper, which isn't exactly what I would expect parchment art to mean. So let's go ahead and add parch art, and I'm going to set the weight to 1, aka the strength to just exactly 1. Usually you want to keep these between 0, meaning no effect, 1, meaning having like the normal effect you'd expect, and then sometimes you can crank these up to like as high as 1.6-ish. I usually start around 1 and adjust based on what I see. So same exact prompt, everything is going to be pretty much exactly the same. All I've done is added this LoRa to it. And you can see this is what it looked like originally before we added that LoRa. So now if we queue it up again, if the LoRa's trigger word is indeed parchment art, which I just kind of guessed, instead of seeing digital art on top of parchment paper, we should actually see a different like art aesthetic on how it actually draws the cars. And then bam, now we definitely have a very different aesthetic. This one is more of like watercolor painted on. It even has like little emblems and stuff. So the parchment art is having an effect, that LoRa. And just to kind of like prove that, I mean, let's crank it up to like 1.6 and see what happens if it really tries hard to do it. It's even pretty close with the little logo. And then again, this is 1.6. So we get even more sort of paper texture and even more like calligraphy, some sort of Copic marker effect. I guess it's like the ink bleeding into the paper. But look how all 4 of them have that same similar aesthetic, right? So if I go back in here and I turn that down to 0, then we're going to go probably back into seeing realistic digital looking cars on tops of parchment paper that's kind of torn, because that's where we started out. And you can see that again if you just scroll around through all these images in the bottom, you can get like a full record of everything you've looked at. So it's going to look like these 4 originally. And there you go, same kind of aesthetic. So again, if we don't turn that LoRa on and we just change the model, let's go to a different model. This one is called Dream Shaper is pretty good. Let's do Dream Shaper. And then see how it's going to stick at load checkpoint for a little bit longer. That's because it's unloading the old one we had in memory and it's loading a new one in. And these models, every time you switch from one to another one, it adds a little bit extra time after it's loaded in memory. Then every time you generate something, it stays loaded in memory until you change the model again. So it's usually good to figure out what model you want to work with and just stick with it for a little bit, just to avoid the time that it takes to like load and unload it. And then we're going to see that instead of this aesthetic, we probably get something markedly different because it's a completely different model trained on different images. Okay, yeah, look at this. Now it's kind of like a square paper. And again, if I apply the LoRa will have an impact, but it might look a little different because the LoRa is being applied to a different base model. So again, like the base model determines a large part of what things are going to look like when you generate it. And then adding LoRas to it lets you kind of like tweak little things or add information about how, for example, parchment art looks so it can use that info. And there you go. It still has. Funny enough, this one is kind of retaining that like square look, but also the paper looks a little bit more realistic. There's a very subtle difference between the LoRa applied on Juggernaut and the LoRa applied using this other model, Dream Shaper. So pretty easy, pretty simple workflow. This is like a good 80% of the start of most projects that I'll work on. And then usually, depending on what you want to do, you'll add and remove nodes. But there's really nothing as simple as this particular flow. Checkpoint, LoRas, positive, negative encoding. These are all things you always need. The sampler, the decoder, and then finally the image that it spits out. Really quick, I'll just do a StableDiffusion 3 one. This is the one that's been banned everywhere. Came out, people seem to hate it. Let me give you a explicit example of something that doesn't work great in normal StableDiffusion and works a little better in StableDiffusion 3. So we're going to say 3 bottles. The bottle on the left is green and has a circle on it. The middle bottle is red and has a square on it. The right bottle is blue and has a triangle on it. So let's just see what an SDXL model would do. And I'm leaving parchment LoRa on, but I haven't actually put the trigger phrase of like parchment art in there. So it may or may not have an effect. Let's just see. And since what you would call prompt adherence is not great in StableDiffusion XL or 1.5, I'm going to guess that we might get 3 bottles. We might see a circle and a square and a triangle, and we might see the colors green, red, and blue, but it probably won't do exactly what we're asking. So yeah, so you can see that we've got 3 bottles, we've got the shapes, we've got the colors, but it's not completely accurate because it's just put a cone on everything. You know, everything gets a triangle, everything gets blue, everything gets a little bit of green. So it's kind of, you know, everything satisfies it, but it's still completely wrong. This is where StableDiffusion 3 is supposed to be a lot better. So I'm just going to grab this particular text. I'm just going to copy it to my clipboard so I've got access to it. And instead of building the StableDiffusion 3 workflow completely from scratch, this is one of the coolest things about ComfyUI. I'm just going to clear this. Empty slate. But one of the cool things is that you can take any image that was generated in ComfyUI, drag it into this interface, and it will remake the workflow that was used to create that image. So here's an example. This is on comfyanonymous.github. This is the guy that makes ComfyUI, and he's got these 2 StableDiffusion 3 examples. So this one, for example, is just a bottle that has a universe inside of it. If I take this and I drag this image onto ComfyUI, look at that. See how it like automatically loaded all these things up in these workflows? So it's still using a load checkpoint, but this one is using a StableDiffusion 3 checkpoint called medium, and it includes all the clips. And so I'm going to pick the include clips version. We've got the positive and negative prompt, which are still green and red. I'm going to replace the green. So again, it says 3 bottles. The bottle on the left is green and has a circle on it, yada, yada. The negative is going to stay. Everything else is going to stay pretty much exactly as it was. The only real difference is that the StableDiffusion 3 usually uses this particular schedule called SGM uniform as opposed to normal. We're just going to leave it at that without having to explain much of it. And that's pretty much it. If I hit Q prompt now, you're going to see this will be turned green as it loads in the StableDiffusion 3 checkpoint. And they call this one SD3 medium because it's like the smaller of the models. It's not the big one, which is 8 billion parameter. This is the 2 billion parameter. And then there it goes. Now we're sampling. We only generated 1, so this does take a little bit longer to render. And let's see what the prompt adherence is. Okay, well, this time we actually have 3 bottles. And let's move the prompt over here just so we can see it all on the screen at one time. So here it says 3 bottles. The bottle on the left is green and has a circle on it. Correct. The middle bottle is red and has a square on it. Okay, doesn't have the square. And the right bottle is blue and has a triangle on it. So it got the 3 bottles and it got the colors and it got the arrangement of them all right. And it even got the circle, but it did miss the square and the triangle. So I'm just going to go into my batch size and set it to 4. We'll generate that again. So we've got 4 other variations of it and just see if any of them get it right. But again, we're comparing it to these guys down here, which doesn't look anything correct, right? Like, because they didn't even pick a single color for the bottles. Sometimes they've got more than 3. I mean, this one, it's kind of there, but again, none of the adherence is there. The adherence on this one is much better. And I think by default, this one, we didn't do the drawing of parchment. Okay, look at this. This one actually did it. And this was out of the 4. Let's see all 4 together. So 3 out of the 4. Okay, well, this one got it wrong because it didn't do a circle, square, triangle. It did a squared circle, but yeah. But these 2 got it right? We've got a circle, triangle, and a square. Oh, this is a circle, square, triangle. What did we want? We wanted green with a circle, red with a square, and blue with a triangle. So this one is correct. This got all 3 right. It got the shapes, it got the colors, it got the order right. This is what you would call prompt adherence. So this is kind of SD3 doing what it's supposed to do. The other big thing is it was supposed to be able to do text really well. So let's go in here into that positive prompt, and we will say in the background is a sign that says 3 bottles. There we go. And let's see if it can manage that. It should do a pretty decent chance. I don't think there's a huge difference between the spelling and uppercase and lowercase, but I tend to always put the text that I want to spell in uppercase in hopes that it, actually uses capital letters so that they're more legible. And this is going to do another brand new 4 ones. And note that I said in the background is a sign. So we'll see if it does that as adherence too. Is it going to be in the background, foreground, on the bottles? All right. I mean, technically, yeah, it says bottles. It could say 3 bottles. We don't see the whole thing. Here's 3 bottles, although we don't have the shapes now, but we clearly have what it looks like it was supposed to say bottles. It missed the L. This just says T bottles, kind of close. And then this one, it's kind of out of focus. It says, we'll say that it says 3. But this is leagues ahead of what SDXL could do when you tell SDXL to generate text. And with enough time and tweaking of settings, you can get this to be incredibly consistent, to always do what you're asking it to do, unless you ask it to draw a person. So let's just do a really quick example of that. I'll put this back in its spot. I'm going to change the batch size. Yeah, we'll leave it at 4, just so you can see all the monstrosities here. So we're just going to say a man laying, or we'll say a woman laying down in the grass, and we'll make sure that she's wearing clothes. So we'll say like blue dress, and then in the negative prompt, just to be extra safe, we'll just put like nude and not safe for work, just so it tries to not make anything nude. It won't, because again, this model's been neutered, but I want to show you how much. So again, the prompt is a woman laying down in the grass blue dress. And we're going to see what SD3 makes of that, and probably the main reason that a lot of people are considering SD3 to be dead in the water. And that is the inability to generate human anatomy. But if you're just generating bottles or text or landscapes or anything that doesn't involve humans, it's still a pretty decent model to experiment with. Again, if you ignore the fact that it's been banned on Civitai because of questionable licensing. So if you care about actually using any of this output for something for commercial reasons, it might pose an issue. So here we go. This is what StableDiffusion 3 thinks. This is actually on the better end of what they look like. Usually it's something more like this. So this is the weird monstrosities that seem to be a direct result of whatever like safety guards or neutering that they did to this model. Kind of close, although still very not accurate, like the way the elbow bends. And then finally, we've got another kind of, I don't even know, Lovecraftian sort of Cthulhu monstrosity. And no offense to anyone that has this exact body type, but it does not look normal, whatever normal is. And just to kind of hone, just to drive this in a little bit, I'm going to, again, take this premise, right? We're going to clear the space out, and let's just rebuild one from scratch again. It's good to do this just as practice. So you want to load a checkpoint. Let's make everything before we connect it. So you want to load a checkpoint. We're going to do an SDXL. We'll pick Juggernaut again, just for the hell of it. Then we're going to want our positive prompt, which is a click text encode prompt. I'm just going to clone this. So we've got a negative. We need our empty latent image down here. We're going to have a K sampler. We are going to have a VAE decoder. And then I'll just drag image over here and pick preview image. And the only thing I'm going to do is put the text in there, and I'm going to add nude, not safe for work, to the negative again. The colors don't actually matter. I'll do it just out of good practice, but the color that you make these has absolutely no bearing. That should be green. This is just for your own personal organization. And then all we really have to do is just connect all these pieces, and that's it. So the model goes to the model. This clip goes into these guys. The VAE connects to the VAE at the end. The latent connects to the latent image here on the sampler. We're going to set these to 1024 instead of 512 since we're using SDXL. And then finally, the positive conditioning goes positive. The negative conditioning goes negative. And then the actual samples that are generated by the sampler goes into the decoder. That's it. That's the whole damn process. So, and again, we'll do 4. And now let's generate. And again, this is instead of using StableDiffusion 3, which is the brand new one that just came out, we're using SDXL, which is, I want to say old, but it came out, I think, earlier this year. And it's kind of the one that is the newest that isn't bleeding edge, because the older one is StableDiffusion 1.5. All right, we are in the sampler step. This one usually takes the longest out of all of them, even including loading the checkpoint. And as soon as the green bar at the very top gets all the way to the right, it'll jump to the decode step, and then here we go. And look at this. All 4 of these, despite the hand looking a little bit wonky, but if you were to compare these 4 to the ones we just generated, I mean, these ones are more anatomically correct. This one's even damn close. Like the hand's a little bit jacked, but it's not horrible. This one maybe less so. Might be missing a finger, like a weird perspective. But it's a long cry from whatever the heck this is. And this is kind of the normal thing you would expect to see out of StableDiffusion 3 when asking for it to generate any sort of a person. Whereas this is the baseline you would expect from StableDiffusion XL, a number of models for it. So there you go, kind of in a nutshell. how Comfy works, the simplest flows for it for both StableDiffusion XL and for StableDiffusion 3, which I wouldn't really get to set on yet. There's way better models coming out that'll replace it. The fact that ComfyUI is probably the software that you should be learning, the one that I'll be using the most. All these tutorials will pretty much be using Comfy from now on. And yeah, the Civitae StableDiffusion 3 ban, I think where Civitae goes on this might dictate if StableDiffusion 3 is truly dead in the water or not. Because if it's banned off one of the biggest sites where people go to train and share their trained models, then there's almost no reason for it to exist. And right now, it doesn't look great for the StableDiffusion 3 model, but I'm optimistic that someone will make sense of it. There are some examples that people have been able to train it already. I don't want to scroll up on here, but someone made a LoRA for StableDiffusion 3 that seems to fix a little bit of the anatomy. And yeah, it's really easy to get all this stuff running. And I did all this in 40 minutes. So I didn't even spend like the $2 and whatever it was. So as you're using Run Diffusion, it's a good idea to always manually stop the session, and that'll stop the money from siphoning out of the account. And I think I can go and see a tally, but that was probably like $1.50 at most. Maybe not even $1.50 that we spent to do all that. So hopefully this was helpful. I promise there's going to be so many more in Comfy. I'll probably be referring people back to this one to just say like, hey, if you don't know how to use Comfy, here's like the basic building blocks. You load the checkpoint, you generate empty latent space, you've got your positive and negative clip encodings, you've got your sampler, your decoder, and then the image that it actually produces. That's it. Every single flow at the minimum has all of those components. And then when it gets complicated, it's just like lots of more plugins and filters and like extra nodes that you're adding into that flow. But that flow pretty much exists in every single workflow where you're generating any sort of AI, art, movies, music, anything. So come back for more. This was just issue 1 of getting comfy with AI. See ya.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hey, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Man, it's not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when the beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.